Hello and welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me in another of my wonderful interviews. Now, earlier this week, as this goes out, I did a video about the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill that is going through and many of the worrying concerns that are in that. And if you saw that video, you will know that I was saying I would have the lady who sent the email to me about this and alerted me, and now to you, about some of these things. Her name is Bianca Isherwood, and she joins me to discuss this bill, why it's, well, not so much why, but the fact that it's going through Parliament, and some of the issues that we may have. She's gone into this in far, far greater detail than I have. So, Bianca, welcome to the show. It's lovely to have you on.
Hello, thank you for having me.
And yes, we are going to be talking about this bill, but it's not just this bill. I understand that some of the implications within this bill are also in other bills as well.
Yes, so this whole conversation that we're having and everything that I'm bringing awareness to are issues from the Children's Schools and Wellbeing Bill, Children Not in School Registers Support and Orders Bill, Data Protection and Digital Information Bill, and also the Human Augmentation, The Dawn of a New Paradigm, a Strategic Implications Project document that can be found on the .gov website.
Right. So this is quite a severe and detailed topic that we are going into, and of course we probably won't have time to go into it with any great forensic detail, but I'm sure we can concentrate on certain numbers of the issues and people can go and find those other bills. I'll get you to, if you can, once we've done the recording, send me links to the other bills, and then I can put them in the description so people can go and find them and read them if they are that way inclined. Where would you like to start then, Bianca?
So maybe we should talk about what is education.
Mm.
I mean, if you're watching this, ask yourself, what do you think education is, and what is the purpose of education? So I think it's about being able to gain the skills to survive, not only in a bush skills sense of survival, but being able to function in society, being able to thrive, to apply skills to a task that benefits yourself, benefits the world. I think we all have a thirst for knowledge. If we're left a bit unmolded, I feel that we would all have that innately.
And kids, I mean, sorry to interrupt, but kids are naturally wanting to, they're asking questions all the time because
Yeah,
they've
yeah,
arrived wherever we are, and they
yeah.
want to know.
And obviously to explore the world, explore yourself, and you develop a worldview as part of doing that. But
Mm.
obviously, when you go to school, all of that is very, uh, you know,
Molded for you.
molded guy. Yeah. So, all education was done outside of school at one point. As if you think back to any of those historical time periods, they're not only tribal, cavemen times. There's very developed time periods of society in all different countries across the world where there were successful people and there was society and there were still classes and a hierarchy, but
Mm.
not everyone went to school. Um, and I do feel like sometimes if you look at it from a different perspective, the arguments that it would fix, the pay gaps and the poor and the rich, you need to send them to school, was an absolute lie, to be honest. The same as I see, this is a little bit off topic for the intro, but I watched a documentary a little while ago and it was about immigrant children coming to the UK and it followed their life from like age 8 to like age 18. Um, and I do wonder why a lot of those, it was always the mother that comes to the UK first and builds a life here enough to bring the child over at a later date. And when they go back to visit, I think, why would you want to come here? Because they come from rural areas where there's farming going on, and they have all this is underdeveloped. We need to do more than this. But I didn't see a problem with their way of life. It wasn't like they come from war-stricken countries that I would understand,
Mm.
or well, they weren't in poverty that I would understand. You wanted to better yourself, but to be honest, I didn't see an issue with it. But in those cases the documentary tried to paint it out as British culture is very teenagers are all into drinking drugs just because they're British, and Islam is bad. That was what the documentary was trying to push. But what I saw in every case of the child, because most of them in their teenage years did go a bit almost off the rails, which they might have done completely had they not had this documentary follow them and talk to them about it, was that they had a lack of connection really early with their natural family, with them, but especially with their mothers.
And
So one,
is that going through the British education system?
yes,
That's how the lack of connection came, because they were, whoops,
yeah.
they,
So,
yeah,
for example, this mum from Africa, she came because she thought that, where they're farming this lovely land and they've got these lovely houses, which are not huts, wasn't enough. So she wants to come to the UK, build a better life. She had an older daughter, so they obviously had a connection before she left. And then she had a son who was just born, and then she left. And when she came here, she had another young baby daughter. So by the time the kid comes here when he's 8, he's really excited to meet his mother. And she's like, oh, hello to the daughter, because they had a pre-bond. But she's very tied up with the baby and her own higher education. And she tells the son, your job here is to get educated. That is why I've done all this sacrifice for you to bring you here to get educated. And it turns out he was severely dyslexic, and his talents were in sports and athleticism, to the disappointment of his mother.
mm.
And I think that part where he could have gone off the rails a bit more and done a bit more naughty things as a teenager, it wasn't that bad, really. Um, I
So are you saying that in those cases, because I know time is precious, but in
yeah,
those cases that the system over here was not really appropriate for those people coming up? The question is it appropriate for our kids in this country,
what I'm
the
saying
way
is,
it's going?
yeah, it's because we chuck children into school far too early. A baby needs that connection. Apparently, scientific studies, some scientific that's not chucked out by the narrative, says that a child needs to be with its mother or its grandmother to attach securely
Yes.
until age 7. So the point I was trying to illustrate is that child did not have a connection with his mother. He didn't feel part of a family. He didn't feel part of back home when he went back home, because he'd been too westernized, so they didn't really accept him. He didn't fit in anywhere, uh,
Right.
and he didn't really know where he belonged or who he was, because he was being told, you have to be this, you have to be that. Now you're this, now you're that.
Yes. But
Um,
but for children who are born over here, who don't have that background and don't have those issues, are you still saying that it's believed that children are still going to school too early because they're being indoctrinated? I mean, I
yeah.
would tend to agree with you that children need to get those first 7 years
Hmm.
with their family to understand who they are and what they are, and not be indoctrinated by a system that is telling them what they are supposed to know rather than what the family wants them to know.
So you think about when you go to reception, you get a lot of criers and they tell you it's normal, they'll get used to it. So when you're a child, you follow your instincts. So when you want to go number two, you just do it. When you want to go sleep, you just do it. When you're hungry, you make a noise, you go like this, you're hungry, you need food. So, and they're very creative. I don't know if you've ever heard of that study that NASA did. I mean, I don't know why NASA was doing the study. Have you ever heard of it? The creativity study. Where
If I remember rightly, I can't remember the name of the chap who did it, but it basically said that they're all geniuses up to a certain point,
until they
but
go to school, yeah.
as soon as they go to school, the geniusness, the inventive creativity, and all of that is knocked out of them, and
Yes.
then then there were far more people who were adequate, which is not
Yeah.
a very nice way of describing anybody, but they weren't excelling, which they might have done if they had left to their own creativity.
So not only is it your creativity that is being taken away from you at such an early age in school, it's your ability to follow your own instincts.
Right.
So your instinct is, I don't want to be separated from my mum or my dad or my family or whoever
No.
the caretaker is. I've seen children, I was one of them, that held on to the school gates and they have to be physically peeled away from the parents. And then you're told you have to sit down. Now it's circle time. Now it's this. Then you get rewarded. You get sticker charts, gold star for you, naughty, naughty because you're not doing as you're told. So you're learning, even to your bodily functions of when to go to the toilet, you're learning to not just do it whenever you feel like it, which prior to that, that's what you've been doing, isn't it? So
Yes.
it takes all of that out of you, your initiative, your creativity, basically all of that, what is natural.
Now, I'm going to put my devil's advocate hat on, and I don't particularly believe this myself, what I'm going to say, but others may argue that because we live in the society and the systems that are in place, we need to train children in a certain way so that they can fit in and obey the rules of the land, so to speak. Now, as I say, I don't personally agree with that, but people will argue that, and people may not necessarily hold that in great that it's essential, but they may say, well, we can't have kids just running around.
Okay.
I mean, because I think a lot of people who have been brought up in the system perhaps have forgotten how they were brought up and just think that's normal.
Mm.
And of course they may listen to this and say, well, you couldn't do that. It was all right for me. It was all right for my mum and dad. Why isn't it all right for the kids?
I
And
thought that as well. I mean,
right,
I actually, when I was really young, I didn't know I had this till I saw a YouTube documentary last year. I had selective mutism, and I didn't know that that was actually like the term for it, where I had so much trauma when I was younger, I wouldn't speak in public or in school, so I wouldn't even
right,
answer the register. And obviously, schools haven't got any better at dealing with that sort of thing because the way that school tried to deal with it was terrible. Like they would have meetings about me and say, what are we going to do? She won't speak, she won't answer the register. So they would do really embarrassing things because obviously it was shyness and trauma. Um, and they'd say, right, we're going to walk to such and such area of the schools, walk in silence, single file. No one can talk but Bianca. And I was thinking, oh my God, don't look at me. Why are you doing that? So it
right.
was a long time ago. I feel like schools haven't got any better at dealing with things like that. We've got
So,
one, sorry,
well,
yeah.
I was just going to say, it sounds like, you're breaking in horses. You know how you have to break in a horse or an animal? You train them so that they will follow certain doctrines or whistles or whatever it is,
Mm,
instead of letting the individual shine and develop its own creativity
yeah.
and
I mean,
understanding and needs and
what,
share those needs,
yes.
instead of going, no, you've got to, we're squeezing all these round things in these square holes.
Yeah, so I mean, after that period of time when I was okay again, I mean, if I was my mother at that time, I would have homeschooled me because obviously I was going through really bad
Yes.
trauma. And at home, I was diving off the sofa, becoming a Power Ranger or whatever. So it's
Mm.
absolutely fine. In school, I was not fine. But after that, I was fine. I did really well in school, and I went on to higher education. And I thought, well, school was okay. But there's actually a book. It's called Wounded by School. I've got it here, and I didn't realize how much everybody is affected today still in their everyday lives, in their decision making, because of just the general structure of school. So you might not have been bullied, but you will still suffer from one of the 12 points in that book. It is
Right.
it's a hidden curriculum is what we learn. Have you ever read John Taylor Gatto's book, Dumbing Us Down?
I haven't, but it sounds like one that I ought to, dumbing us down.
So in that, so he was an award-winning teacher, and he won an award for best teacher of the year in New York. And his whole speech was how it was basically his resignation letter and why he wasn't going to be a teacher anymore. And he goes through what is the hidden curriculum in school. And, I always thought, well, it's just a babysitting service so everyone else can be in their hamster wheels. And it's got somewhere for the children to go that's free. So obviously it's going to be attractive to people. Um, but he says, if I've got time to read very, very briefly the the points he makes for what the hidden curriculum of school
Yeah,
is.
no, too.
So it's confusion. So students are taught too much, too fast, and without context. So information is presented as fragmented, disconnected ways, leaving students feeling overwhelmed and uncertain about how it all fits together. So, my eldest has got dyspraxia. So, what we've started to do is unit studies as home educators. It works better for him because he needs to be fully immersed in a subject to really like understand it long term. So, if we studied India, we'd do maths and science and English and that. So, we did like the guy who invented infinity and the decimal system number, and the cooking and the art and the geography and the plants that grow there and the animals that are there and the languages that are there. So we fully go into a subject so you have more of a greater picture of it. So that doesn't really happen in schools. Everything's like skirted on past. And if you have a brick in the wall missing, so you understand fractions, but then you don't understand percentages, and then the next time you loop around you've got something missing, and you can't pause to catch that child back up to the rest of the class. Class position. So schools teach children to know their place in a hierarchy, whether through grades, tackling, or social stratification. Students quickly learn to stay in their designated class and not to challenge the system. Indifference, the ringing of bells and scheduled shifts from subject to subject, teaches students not to care too deeply about any one thing. No task is ever truly completed, and curiosity is discouraged. Emotional dependency, students are conditioned to seek approval from authority figures through rewards and punishments. They learn to follow instructions without questioning, reinforcing compliance over independence. So last year or the year before, I briefly looked after a friend's little girl because she works very long hours in the city and she's often away overnight, and she lost her nanny. So just for a couple of weeks, I had her little girl a lot of the time. And she goes to private school. And I dropped her off there, and I was very interested in what they do at this very expensive private school. And I looked at they have it in their window, what they were doing this term. And it was not very good. I did that plus more in my home education. But one of the stories there, she came out in floods of tears, and she was very young. She was only in reception. Um, she was come out crying. She said to me, "I'm not a superstar." I said, "Why are you not a superstar?" She said, "Because I forgot to bring in my reading book, so I didn't get a gold star. So I had to sit on a different rug, not the superstar rug." And I said, "Oh no, where's your reading book?" She said, "I don't know. She's 5. She's 5." So things like that, she's being punished for. I don't think a lot of 5-year-olds really know where much of their stuff is.
No, no. And why should they really?
Yeah. So intellectual dependency, critical thinking is stifled as students are taught to wait for an expert to tell them what to think and what to do. Original ideas and independent learning take a backseat to standardized instructions. Provisional self-esteem. A student's worth is determined by external validation, grades, report cards, and teacher approval, rather than an internal sense of achievement and growth. So a bit like I'm not a superstar. One can't hide. Schools create an environment of constant surveillance where students are always being watched, tested, and evaluated. Privacy is non-existent, conditioning them to accept a world of monitoring and control. That's actually what's taught in schools, and that's the hidden curriculum, and that is really the point of school. And I remember the
And
point I'm trying to make, sorry, just
no, go on.
quickly, about when I was talking about my own trauma when starting school. Kids' mental health. So 3 in 10 children in public school today say they're having suicidal thoughts. 3 in 10. So that's like what, 9 children in a class of 30, that one teacher has the responsibility on top of all the other responsibilities they put on teachers to notice if that child is showing suicidal tendencies. And obviously that child is going home. And when you have a child in school, I don't think parents really push to do anything else because they've had their social at school. They're doing their learning at school. So the argument that children, home educated children, aren't seen, we're out in the world. We're all the clubs, we're in all the parks, we know all the people down the road and in the local high street. We're registered at libraries, we're registered at all these different places. Whereas if you're a school child, I actually think you're more at risk of not being seen because you only have that one teacher and maybe a staff passing in the hallway. They're not going to notice a child. They haven't got time to say, oh, are you okay today? And then they're going home and then they're probably on screens and you don't really know your child, to be honest. I mean, the average school mum of a public school child sees their child for 13 hours a week. Whereas an average homeschool mum, I don't know where this statistic comes from because mine's obviously much higher, sees their children for 77 hours a week. But that's still only 3 days a week, so I don't know where their kids are the rest of the time. But I didn't realise how much I didn't know my own child until they came home in the lockdowns. And then I discovered that we had all these issues that I didn't know existed in terms of his education and his SEND needs and things, which was one of the biggest drivers of me taking my child out of school, but not the only one.
Right. So, I mean, another aspect of school, of course, is you're schooling children to the workplace and quite specific type of work. It would seem, not sort of getting those entrepreneurs, people who can think for themselves. And very often when you see those people who do think for themselves, they've come from, they've left school early or they were bunking school left, right and centre because they didn't fit in or didn't feel they fitted in and followed their dreams. And consequently, some of them, obviously not all of them, managed to survive and others may have taken a different path. So we've looked at how dreadful school is and this misconception that it's actually a good thing for your child because if you've got children. What would you say then to the argument is a lot of people will say, yeah, we realise school isn't the best thing, but we both have to work and what do we do with the kids?
Well, you have to really figure out how much do you really need to live on and what is more important and what kind of lifestyle you want to have. So I know a lot of single mums who homeschool. So if they can do it on one income, it can definitely be done with two parents and one working. You have to be a little bit more entrepreneurial yourself in your own mindset. There's plenty of work from home jobs. There's plenty of family businesses where the children can learn alongside. There's lots of ways you can do it. It's just having the creativity to think outside of the box to make that work for you.
And the government would say we need to know where the kids are because there's a lot of child abuse, malnutrition, poverty is all affecting the kids. If we can see them every day, we know that they're being educated, to what they consider a sufficient level, and that we can isolate any issues. And I know that because it happened to a friend of mine, and they had the police turn up and everything. But actually, it's all resolved quite well because the kids were perfectly fine. But the government, it does seem to say that in this bill that you highlighted, that they want to have much more control. Because like all these things, they're saying it's for the benefit of the people when it doesn't seem to be the benefit in actually, it might benefit very small numbers of society, those kids who are being abused and what have you. But for the majority of children, the abuse is actually the school system itself.
Oh, absolutely. There's a Ofsted report. It's on the .gov website from last year. I mean, I don't know if this makes it better or worse because the sample from the survey was only 700 and something children. But in that 700 and something children, 79% of girls aged 9 to 16 had experienced some form of physical sexual abuse in school. And that's only student to student. Around my area where I live, there's been countless front page headlines of people that work in education, from teachers to teaching staff, that have been convicted of paedophilia, whether it's actually, having relations with a child or for child pornography. Sorry, I've just realised I've said those words.
It's all right. No, I don't think that's a problem. But that's true. And of course, the other argument which one would say is, well, a lot of child sexual activity with parents would come from people they know. So, they'll swing it that way and say, well, again, if we don't know what's going on. Now, I completely am in your camp on this. I'm just putting the other argument that they will use as a lever to try and keep kids in schools. But I'm with you. I completely disagree with the whole school system. My sister took her kids out of school, and you've never met a more confident bunch of they're 3 boys, you know, and all the children that I meet who are homeschooled are incredibly competent, articulate, knowledgeable, and don't seem to have any of the issues that a lot of ordinary school kids have. That's obviously just hearsay, of course. I haven't met every child, so how would I know? But if we can move on to what the government are trying to do, just so that we can highlight, you know, because people will have gone to school themselves, and this is the norm. They're not used to the fact that actually perhaps it is much more holistic, as you've highlighted, to bring up your children, to have more time with your children. But they want to get kids to schools much earlier, so you are separated. You're with people who you don't know their personal background, their philosophy, their politics, their particular sexual ways of doing things. And we know that there are a lot of very dodgy lessons in the curriculum.
Yeah, if I can just stop you there. So Labour's obviously just made it so parents are not allowed to ask or know what's in their children's curriculum.
Which is ridiculous.
And also, what I didn't know when I wrote you that document the other day is that the national curriculum is currently going through a review. So part of the schools bill is that all schools will have to follow the national curriculum. So whether that's academies or alternative provision, they will have to follow the national curriculum. So we're going to consent to that, and we're going to put that bill through. We don't even know what's going to be on it. We don't even know what they're going to introduce next.
I made a video this morning, which will probably be yesterday's video as this goes out, about the fact that young girls are being encouraged, and I believe this is even going on behind the parents' back, to take a certain medical intervention, which long term may cause problems with having children of their own. I don't know the details of that to hand, but there is a link in the previous video I made. So things are, you know, as soon as your kid is out of your view, you don't know what's happening.
No, and they don't trust you because they're not being raised by you. There's not enough time in that 13 hours a week for you to instill your own values. And obviously, when you're a child in school, you think your teacher knows everything. And
Yes.
you're only taught to interact with that adult in an authoritative way and not to question it. So when you're a home-ed child and you're out and about, you're always asking questions. My
Yes.
children are always asking questions to the butcher or the person who works in the shops or the person at the museum, or, you know, and they're encouraged to keep doing that. I did a lot of school outreach during the time when the rollout of the medical intervention went out, and I saw it then as well. There was whole leaflets I actually physically held in my hand and saw. It's a little cartoon about, if your parent's a conspiracy theorist, you don't have to tell them, and we can arrange for you to have this thing, and they don't have to know about it. So you can't say that, oh, it's okay, when they come home, I'll tell them what's right from wrong. They can go to school, but I'll just tell them that, you know, there's only 2 genders or whatever it is that you have issues with being taught in school, because it won't work.
No, they're so indoctrinated.
When you chuck them all in together, obviously, children in school only socialize with peers their own age in a prison setting for however many years. We're home educated children. They have friends older and younger from all walks of life, and other adults are considered their friends. You know, my children will sit and have a chat with my friends if my friends come round, and we've all had different experiences. So they get to do that, and children just think, well, everyone's doing it, and everyone in their worldview is the people in the class, which are all following the one authoritative figure. So they think
yeah, no. So I mean, what you're painting there is that you've got 2 systems. One is a very narrow system, in which is quite indoctrinating. The other one is life.
Yes.
meeting all people, all sorts of different people from all walks of life, and for the child growing up to make their own decisions and come to their own conclusions and base their knowledge of the world. And you, as the parent, are helping and guiding them, but not necessarily indoctrinating. Obviously, they're going to see how you do things and get involved and maybe help with the dinner and, do chores around the house and things, because that's part of life. But they'll also, as you said, talk to the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker as you go out,
Mhm.
and form their own opinions, which is very important and vital for them, instead
Yeah,
of...
they see life. So even if you don't have a child who has a particularly entrepreneurial spirit, which I think most home educated children do, but even if they don't, because they've been out in the world, through observation, they get to understand how
Yeah.
the world works. So, Forbes predicts by 2030 that 90% of the job market won't exist anymore. So what is the point of school at the moment? What are we all gearing up to when all those jobs are going to be gone? So I think home educated children with their creativity intact, the ability to creatively think and to critically think, will be much more well adapted to survive in whatever we end up in. And
Yes.
also want to turn well, basically a teacher will become like a prison guard staff, because you'll just be there to monitor the children, because they want by 2030 all classes to be taught AI, computer, robot, online. So, teachers should care about this schools bill as well. I know one of the biggest things is academies having to follow the national curriculum, which means, it depends where the school is. So if you have inner city kids and a lot of them don't speak English, you need to spend more time on teaching those children English than, say, design and technology, so they can pass their GCSEs. All this GCSEs, that's all they care about. What is a GCSE? It's a memory quiz, isn't it?
Hmm.
How much of the indoctrination do you remember? When in your life, unless you're doing a pub quiz or you go on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, do you have to fill out a questionnaire on how much do you remember? When you learn something, you should learn it. So you need to learn it through hands-on, mostly like experience. And 68% of children are failing their GCSEs apparently at the moment. So there used to be college schemes all across the country for 14 to 16-year-olds, home educated children, to do GCSEs, should they so wish to. Because obviously not all home educators do GCSEs. Personally, I will leave it up to my children once they decide, if they have a career path in mind and I know they'll need to access higher education, then I will arrange that for them. But given the fact that most of these careers aren't going to exist, and given the fact that if it's anything to do with business, you're much better learning from someone who does business. I mean,
Yes.
the college courses or the degrees about business are very, very, outdated. They don't teach children about how it actually works in reality, like things like NGOs.
Hmm.
They don't learn that in their degree. Um, but yeah, 68% of children are failing, and 20% of children failed English and maths last year.
And
And I
what
watched,
and what does that say to the child if you're saying you've got to reach this standard and it's measured by this, effectively another gold star that you're given or not given? Again, you've got, if you don't reach it because you just were unable to do it, or that you've got problems at home, or there are other issues, psychological issues or health issues or whatever, and you didn't make it, you are then deemed a failure.
well, yeah, you're
And you're not a failure in life at all. You're never a failure, because I've tried to do things, not being able to do it at the time. 5, 10 years later, oh, I'm much better at this. I've learned other ancillary things, and now I can do it. But if you tell somebody at 16 or 18, you haven't, that's it. Your career is all based on this memory quiz, as you said. I
mm,
mean, what is that telling the child, and the pressure that that poor child is under? I mean, totally ridiculous.
yeah. I mean, I got through life with a funny GCSE story. So I've got dyscalculia. I didn't know that till I was an adult. I can't do maths. And I didn't get much of a chance to learn maths in school, because we had a substitute teacher for the last 2 years where we do GCSEs, and my class was really naughty. So the teacher just sat there and refused to teach us because we were a naughty class. So, and then they put me in for a higher tier than I should have been in, because I was top set for everything else but maths. And they said, well, if you're top set for everything else, you could do this. And obviously I didn't. I failed. I got a D. I managed to get an A star in RE, of which I didn't attend any of the classes for.
That's amazing. Well done. Maybe if you didn't attend any of the maths classes, you could have got an A plus.
We only went to RE every 2 weeks, and every 2 weeks I was at the orthodontist, so I missed the whole everything, but I got an A star on that one. And we didn't really have an English teacher that taught us what was going to be on the test. It was Romeo and Juliet, and we'd never studied that from
Right.
year 11. And I got an A star on that.
But it's interesting you mentioned that you suffered from something. What did you call it, that you couldn't do maths?
Dyscalculia. So it's like dyslexia, but with numbers. So I'm
Right. So
what
I mean, I have a personal hate of labels because as soon as you've got a label, and it's bad enough as an adult being told, oh no, you've got this label, so therefore, and you kind of go, oh, that's me. I've been put into a box. I can't get out of it unless I'm very lucky or something. But that's my life. If you do that to a child and you say, well, you're dyslexic, you're autistic, you're this, you're that, you've got this label that is now following you around, and I don't think that's necessarily helpful. I don't know what you think.
I don't either. I mean, it's helpful in school because it's protective in school because, my son used to get told off all the time when he couldn't do the work, but if you teach him in a different way, like I've done at home, he can do the work, but they don't know
Right.
that. So, but what provisions can they actually make though in school? Because they can't
There's
start
too many kids and not enough.
that's the whole point of home education, is to teach to every individual to have the best possible chance. Sorry, I did forget your question there.
No. It's just about labels and things. So let's just. I mean, you've got this bill, and people can go and have a look at these bills. What's the most? I want to sort of get to what's the most horrific things that people should be looking out for, and then
Okay.
also what can people do about it? Because I don't like having shows where it's like, this is it, tough. That's the end of it. What can you do? Because we know that from this bill that if you take your kids out of school, they will chase and hound you. And it seems ridiculous, like so much of what the government does. It wants to, even in your own life, they want to control everything. And that is not right, especially if it's a supposedly democratic government that we tell them, this is how we want you to look after and administrate this country. And they're turning back going, no, we're dictators. This is tyranny. You will do as we say, and we want to know everything about it, which does seem to be the case. So tell us what are the highlights that we should worry about?
Okay. So in terms of home education, the bill takes away parental rights, requires consent to the local authority to remove your child from school roll, and breaches and violates human rights laws. So at the moment, if you don't want your child in school for a multitude of reasons, which is usually mental health, send, you realised it's an indoctrination camp and you want to spend more time at home, for whatever reason, you have the right to home educate. Yeah, you can just say, I'm deregistering, take them out of school. Now, you have to give a good reason to the local authority, who will be the decider on whether or not you deserve.
And where do they get their authority to have that attitude?
From this bill, because they're not trained specialists. The people that deal with this, local authorities, they're called LAs.
But where does the bill get its authority?
Oh, the bill itself, well, whoever made the bill.
Yeah, and so what gives them that? I mean, this is where I like to sort of pull this onion back and say it's all very well pointing at legislation and saying, but legislation says, where do they get the authority to legislate in the first place? That's people don't ask that question. They go, oh, it's a fait accompli. The government have done, but the government is not the boss.
No.
People seem to forget this, and it really frustrates me. The government is not legislation does not affect people. Only if you consent to it.
Yeah. I don't think people forget. I think people don't even realise that.
They do exactly, but then they'll just go, oh, but that's the law of the land, as if, and that's because they've been indoctrinated by going to school in the first place, which gets me very annoyed, because it's an ever increasing circle, because they cannot see the way out. They don't even know there is a way out.
Yeah. Most people think that home education is illegal. So home educated children are, 9 times more likely to be reported to social services just because they're seen out of school on a school day.
Yeah.
Only 0.4% of those cases are ever transferred to a, child protection plan. whereas school, it's like 9.4%. But those cases in school of children, that need help at home for whatever reason, abuse, etc., they're never really caught. So one of the biggest drivers of support for this bill from the general public that have been indoctrinated, they don't understand, is the Sarah Sharif case. She was in school. She was before a judge. The judge deemed her that she was safe to go home with her father who abused her. She was known to social services from before she was born. The school saw her in school with bruises all over her, and they didn't want to make another report. One, because a judge who's more authoritative than them, so the judge says so it must be fine, said it's okay, but also because they were scared of being called Islamophobic because she was of that religion. So, yeah.
I mean, this is where it gets very muddled, isn't it? Because if you start mixing different cultures with different backgrounds and parents from different cultures, it's very difficult then to have any policing, because you could say, well, this culture's been brought up in this way and this culture has been brought up very differently. They may not be wrong in their own worlds, but when you start mixing them and you start going, look, we have this one system of judiciary, and the judge is going, no, it's absolutely fine, but not realizing fully what might happen to that child. But I mean, this is getting into a different area altogether. But this is the problem that the government have made for people, and particularly, so schools will have laudable, not all of the people at school are denomic Satanists, and they may be trying to do the best for the children within their limited understanding of what they're actually doing.
Yeah.
If you see what I mean. I mean, there's a lot of misguided people out there trying to do the best for people, but through their misguidance, they actually make things worse.
Well, I think most of the good teachers have quit, and they're doing other types of educational things, and the ones that are in there, they're becoming too scared to even try to speak out. I personally know a music teacher who tried to teach it was a politics class. So in politics, surely you should discuss
absolutely
points of opinions. But he said maybe that, the Black Lives Matter movement was just a way to keep racism thriving, and maybe it was more detrimental than good. And one of the class members reported that to the headmaster, and he got a warning. But he was like, but I wasn't saying it was my opinion. I was just saying some people have this view, some people have that view, but you're not allowed to have that view. And I met another lady in 2020 who was a teacher. She come to me in floods of tears going, what am I supposed to do? I can't march those children down to the hall to get that, thing in the but if she tried to talk to any of the children about not having it, she would have been fired. And then she was thinking, oh, my mortgage, so teachers there's complete, teaching's best when a teacher can be an individual as well,
Yes, with complete autonomy.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the bill then. What are the specifics that we should be worried about that people can take away?
Right, gives untrained local authorities who don't know your child or your family the right to decide what's in your child's best interests, whether that's the curriculum you use, your hobbies, activities, books, or an involvement of faith, or if they think your child should go to a public school, they can just rule that. You're just overruled. So you used to be able to appeal that if you got a school attendance order, but now you can't appeal. We've taken away the right to appeal. You can, at the moment, you get fines of up to 2,500 and 3 months in jail for not satisfying a school attendance order. Well, that will move up to 56 weeks in jail.
So if your kid does not go to school enough times for whatever reason, you can end up in prison.
Yeah, so this is for home educators who are refusing to go back to school, but also if you have low attendance, the actual figure is if you miss, let me just say, I don't want to say it wrong and get told off.
And so that would make it a criminal act.
The criminal act, if you miss 5 days or more in 10 weeks, you will get a fine or jail time. So
if everyone pulled their kids out of school, for more than that time, they wouldn't be able to house them, would they? There wouldn't be enough spaces in prison. I mean, this is a ridiculous notion. They'd fine them, and then what would they do if they didn't pay it? They'd have to send them to prison. But there's not enough space in prison.
Well, we've released all of those criminals recently, so
Oh, right. Yeah. It's just, well,
the
maybe some of
five,
those are teachers, parents.
the 5 days in a 10-week period also includes lateness and inset days. It includes inset days, a day that they've said that you can have off anyway because we're all off. That
So
counts part of your
that
five.
counts as a non-attendance.
Yeah,
So that's not even your fault.
no. You
So
better not
if the school cocks it up and has more inset days than in those 10 weeks, you
well,
could
what was
go to
that?
prison for because you didn't take that. What are you supposed to do? Take the kid to a school that you can't get in and go, well, I'm trying to get in. I'll just smash the window and throw my kid through the window. Sorry, son, you've got to go in there because, I don't want to go to prison. So you'll send the kid to prison, which
How
is
is
the
it?
school.
How is it? This is the schools and wellbeing bill. I don't see how it's in any child's wellbeing to have a bunch of parents locked up
No,
or in
quite.
debt for the fines.
Well, we know that anything the government says is the complete opposite. So if it's called well-being, it's actually non-well-being.
Yeah.
You know, my audience will understand that.
So
Critics may not.
imagine if you've taken your child out of school because of mental health reasons, and your child says to you, "If you make me go back, I'm going to kill myself."
Yeah.
So now you're faced with what? A big fine and jail time, or you send them to school.
And then what happens if you're sent to school? If you're sent to prison, the kid presumably still has to go to school anyway. They just
Well,
frog march the kid in.
if you have, obviously, I don't know what happens with that, but obviously it's who else can look after your child when you're away in jail or into the care system. So it reminds me of,
So then they'll have to pay.
yeah,
And they'll have to pay. Ultimately, the taxpayer pays because the government has no money. Not that money means anything these days. It is all absolutely ludicrous.
one of the other big problems with the bill is it's very vague. So it's investing all this power into local authorities. They can use this bill to their own understanding, to their own jurisdiction. So there's no protection from an LA who abuses that. So if you're a home educator and they've decided they don't like what's on your report because you're doing critical thinking and they want to come see the books you're using, and they don't agree with that, there's no one on your side. So good laws should always have protection built in for both sides, I think, so, but this doesn't. So all of it, the whole bill is very open to, it could go this way, it could go that way. If they don't like your face, you might get in trouble. Depends who you've got. And these people, remember, are just people who are hired off a job interview. They don't have any specialist training in education or SEND issues or medical issues or mental health issues or child specialists, none of it. So, and a lot of them are very young, so they've also just come out of that indoctrination system themselves, and they don't have children and they don't have life experience. So
Yeah.
they will be doing what they think is best, but obviously
Yes. They're doing the devil's work.
yeah, they don't realize that most of the time.
No.
So if there's any inquiries, the bill introduces automatic formal procedures requiring home educators to satisfy the authority that home education is in the child's best interest. So that's just pleading your case again. But there's no, what was I going to say? We'll come back to that one. The new data and reporting requirements for home educators is excessive. So it takes away time from learning and enrichment and connections. And anyone who offers services for home educated children will have to do this as well. So number one, it's ridiculous because a lot of home educators don't work with tutors or curriculum. So they'll make up their own. So learning happens all the time. Learning is 24/7.
Well, I mean, that's the most ridiculous thing I've just heard. That you just said that anyone who's helping to educate somebody else's children will have to abide by. But define what you call educate. I'm just coming over to sing to the kids. Is that education or is that entertainment?
Probably it would count because you're involved in the child's life, because you might be a dangerous person. So we now need your name and address and your phone number.
Even though you're home educator. So a friend of the family has now got a report to the government and say, oh, by the way, I'm just popping round and, I've been in the war in the old days. I'm an old fella and I may accidentally recount some stories Or I may, I'm a gardener and I may just happen to say how you grow a tomato. And I better tell you because that could be deemed as educating a child.
Yes.
I mean, this most.
Don't put it in report, they'll be asking, well, what have you done then? Because you've done nothing. You can't put it in because you don't want to put the people's details in because they're
Right.
not comfortable with it, especially if they're a stranger, which I don't blame them. But and on the other hand, they might not like it. They might not like your singing lessons and say you're wasting your time. You're not doing adequate educational
Well, it's
provision.
not, I mean, ultimately, it's none of their bloody business, is it?
No.
I mean, it's not, when it comes down to it, I mean, this highlights more and more that this is none of their business. They just want kids to fit a mold to go so that they can be useful idiots, soldiers of the state, basically, and just obey. You will obey. I mean, it's basically the Daleks, isn't it?
Probably.
I mean, that's what it just seems like. You must obey, or we exterminate you. Simple as that. I mean, if people can't see the obvious nature of that, then they're blind.
So yeah, as you say, if you talk to an old lady in the cafe and she talks about knitting or the war, and you have to ask her for her name, address, and phone number, and she says no, then you can't put it on the report. The report has to be made within 15 days if there's any changes.
But even that, the fact that you've got to tell them, I mean, I find that abhorrent. It's your business. It's your children. You gave birth to them. They're your children. You own them. The state has nothing whatsoever to do with them. They can go and do as they damn please, unless the government admits that we are living in a tyranny and it is a dictatorship. If they continue to pretend that this is a democracy, that there is, freedom of movement, freedom of speech and everything, if they say, no, this is it, and we have police guards on every... which effectively they do have police with guns, which is called 5G, I believe. That is effectively what is happening. But if they're going to pretend that we live in a free society, then they've got to allow people to act in a free society. If they tell us that we live in a dictatorship, well, fair enough. Then you can go, oh, okay, yeah, I better do the report because that's what we're all living under. But
it does surprise me that people can have thoughts to think that we're still not.
Exactly.
So it will make services for home educated children close. So at the moment, my children go to different classes and clubs, and there's a home ed class of that, whatever it is. They would have to do so much paperwork, and then they'd have to be inspected, and they probably would just say, oh, it's not worth it.
Not worth it. They don't want to put people off, don't they?
Yeah, so I mean, the reporting alone would take so much time for whoever's the primary educator of the children. So if it's a homeschool mum, home education mum, sorry, not homeschool, that would take up half a week to fill in these reports. Yeah. So there'll be a lot of mums who might just throw in the towel and send their kids back to school just on that alone.
Yeah. Listen, we are running out of time, and I don't want to go too much over the hour because I know people just won't watch, and I want people to watch and hear what you're saying. What can people do about this?
Well, local awareness that home education is not illegal and that we're not high risk, we are socialised, we're not invisible, we're not homeschooling, we're not doing what you did in lockdowns and COVID. You need to understand what it is. It's our legal right, and we're not uneducated. That all the narrative about the Sara Sharif and children's safety is got nothing to do with this register, which is destroying academies, destroying schools, and obviously low-key eliminating home education. Because if we're at the point where we're coming to people's homes, you can't rate someone's family home against Ofsted ratings, and all the other lovely educational provisions like Hope Sussex, they'll cease to be what they are if they have to now conform, and then they have to teach national curriculum. It won't exist. It won't exist anymore. Teachers need to be worried. Any educational provision needs to be worried. Oh, it doesn't affect us. It will affect you. You need to research it more for yourself so you fully understand the implications of it, because obviously we haven't gone through them all today. There's local rallies. There's one in Parliament Square on the 8th. There's a big email campaign. Email the Lords, email the MPs. But obviously I do like your way of thinking, to become sovereign and then have it not affect you. To be honest, I I will have to give in and jump through the hoops because I'm not sending my children back to school. But obviously, if that does pass, my long-term plan would be to move to a place or a country where I can home educate my children.
Well, that's that's an option for those people who can afford it. I mean, I'm just going to say this, and people can take it or leave it if you've got this far in the video. Ultimately, you've got to get out of that jurisdiction, because that jurisdiction is the legislative jurisdiction that says this: if you are a person, you must obey this. But we don't have to be persons; we can be people. And if you get off the electoral roll, which is the most important thing, and tell the Attorney General, I'm no longer under your system, and I am of the people, not a person, and I go to a higher authority, people need to understand that the government have a higher authority, because the king takes an oath to God, whatever that may mean. He takes an oath to God, and he takes this oath to the higher authority. The Supreme Court has legislated that God is above legislation. So the Bible becomes their rule book. And for people who need to be governed, you are a person. Those that don't need to be governed by legislation can be governed by God, and God's rules are very simple. And this isn't about believing in God. It's not about having faith or being religious or anything like that. It's just simply saying, if the government accept the Bible as the book of law, which they do, because we know that they are ministers. They always have their term where they start at Westminster Cathedral. They have prayers every day, and they take these oaths to this higher authority. Then you just need to, you need to be able to prove that you are worthy of not being a person, but you are basically saying, I go by the Bible's rules: love thy neighbor, do no harm, and I'm not these things. And I know for a fact it works. I know people who are doing this, and it works. And people have got to decide which tier, the two tiers of society that they're in. They're either in under legislation, and then they can do their protests and all this, and because none of that will work. None of that will work, because once you've stepped out of the legislation, once you're no longer in that, they basically, I mean, it's a hard process, but they will then leave you alone, and you won't have to deal with this. But it's not, it takes a bit of understanding. But we're just getting to that point where one's got to keep saying this now, because the legislation is so tight that it's almost impossible to live under. And so I'm passionate now about expressing those views, and people can look those up, because if you live under legislation, you've had it. I mean, you're a slave. I mean, we're already slaves, but we consent to it. That's the difference. We consent because we fill in, I want to be able to vote for the government. Well, you're just stepping in. It doesn't matter who gets in. The government is always getting in. So you want to get off that for sure.
There will be a lot of people who don't have the confidence to do that, though.
I know, I agree. I mean, it's a long process. You've got to get your head around it. You may think, oh, it's all to do with religion and stuff. It's got nothing to do with that. It's just simply saying, this is a book that the government have to, and they do, abide by it. It's not easy to completely understand how that system works. And those that can't, and that are dependent and have been brought up in the way that most people have, will remain a person, because they will need to have universal credits, and they'll need to have, retirement. They'll want to get a job. They'll want passports and all these sort of things. And to step out of that, it's a very, very brave thing. But it is where the light is. It is freedom from the tyranny. And in the past, it wasn't really necessary, because legislation was looking after people. But it's now got to the point where this is no longer legislation. This is just tyranny. And they've just got their acts and statutes and rules and regulations. And if you don't do it, then they'll basically lock you up or pop you off in some fashion. And they want your children.
I 100% agree with you on everything you just said. However, for the people that are going to be experiencing the negatives on this very short term, you can join a free speech union. There's a charity called Education Otherwise who takes on legal cases as well. So might be worth looking into those or joining one of those. And obviously I am a Heritage Party member. I know your views on politics. It does have a good manifesto long term, but
Oh, I know. I've had David in the
Yeah.
on the channel several times, and you know, he's extremely laudable. But unfortunately, it's just in the other system, and I've not met anybody who's trying to be an MP or anything like that, or to stand as a candidate, who even understand that this other system works, and that's really sad. But they're all doing the best. In an ideal world, you know, David would be the guy I vote for.
Yeah. So I have.
But I don't believe in voting, so that's the because you've stepped into the jurisdiction they have created, and that is the problem. But anyway, that's a whole new thing. Can you send me the link so I can put all those and those names of places, and we'll put them in the description, so the viewer who's now totally confused because I opened my gob. But do have a look at the bills. Do have a look at all the shenanigans, and you know, my thing was just, you know, use your own common sense. Think what should, you know, what kind of life we should have, not what they are telling us to have. It's getting tighter and tighter and tighter, and we do need now to be able to think more and more for ourselves.
It's time to speak up as well, not just to think.
It starts with the thought, doesn't it?
It does start with the thought, but there's so much pressure, you know, fear mongering of, you know, if you write something online that's right wing, you're going to get 15 years in prison, you know. There's so many home educators that are not standing with me at the moment for this bill because they're too scared, because they don't want to be on the radar, they don't want to be associated with this, because they don't want to be penalised for it, so they're hiding, they're not in their power, and they're not doing anything about this. That's no good either.
No.
You've already taken that step to take your children out of school because you know it's right, then you got to fight for it as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, totally agree. We kind of ran out of time, which is a shame, but we may come back to this and get you back on in time. Let's see what the comments are and see how it goes, see how interested people are. This is one of those things, it is the future. I mean, this is where it's so absolutely vital that people make a stance, because your children are the future, and the future depends on their ability to think for themselves or to step in line with what the government wants. And that does not look, I mean, if that's what we've got today, 10 years time, what's it going to look like? You know, your children may well be just taken away from you at birth and trained, and you get nothing to do with it. That's not a future I want to see, and I've got grandchildren. So there we go. Bianca, thank you so much for talking to us. It's absolutely vital people look at this and think about it, and speak out and reach out and start coming up with solutions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So there we are, ladies and gentlemen. A difficult subject to get your head round, but do check out the links. They'll all be in the description, and we may well come back on this and keep bashing the drum, because I think we have to, don't we? Yeah. Until next time, I'll be back with more wonderful interviews and, of course, my monologues. But till then, from Bianca and myself, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.